will be on the Registration of Engineers Act 1967 or Act 138, as well as we're going to cover on the Registration of Engineers Regulations 1990. Today's date is the 20th of July. The speaker today will be BM's very own Datuk Paduka Engineer Kizrul Abdullah. He's the chairman of BM Disciplinary Committee. And the moderator today will be myself, Architect Amy Roslan. So I'm Architect Amy Roslan, one of the founding members of this IR webinar series. Yeah, so we started this webinar series 4 years ago. So this is our 4th year of doing IR 2024. 4 years ago, it was known as IR 2021, then 22, 23, and 24. I'm a manager at Amy Roslan Atelier Consultant, manager at Asas Reka Architects Sdn Bhd. I'm also a council member of Pertubuhan Architect Malaysia, PAM, from 2021 until 2024. I would like to welcome everyone to IR 2024. Today is session number 1. As you can see on the slide, everyone has already received a copy of this, especially when you are registering. You have seen this flyer before. So we have 19 sessions of classes of sessions starting from today until the 5th of October. So if you notice the arrangement of the topics of the webinar series, we group it together according to themes. Okay, the first group is about professionalism. So we cover Act 138, and then its subsidiary legislation, the Registration of Engineers Regulation 1990. And then tomorrow we will be having BM scale of fees for session number 2. And then the second group is on development process. So on development process, we start with the land planning and building. We start with National Land Code, Act 172, and then we have the Environmental Quality Act, Act 133, and then its subsidiary legislation, which is the UBBL 1984. And then we split into fire requirements, passive, and then followed by active. And then followed by the Housing Development Act 1966 or Act 118. And then we have the Strata Development topic, Act 318, as well as Act 757. That is the end of the development process. Then we enter on theme number 3, which is on contract. So before you read any standard form of contract, you have to know the mother of the contract first, which is the Contracts Act 1950. But as technical people, it is an open secret among ourselves because we are in the construction industry. So basically, we are technical people. I know technical people, they do not like to read the law. We are people of visual, people of technical. We enjoy solving problems rather than to read text. But I would recommend everyone to read the law cover to cover, because law is something gazetted. Every single word does matter. There is no such thing as section 1 until section 10 is important, and then section 20 until section 30 is not important. Yang ni saya selalu dengar, bukan arkitek saja, engineer pun sama naiknya. Alright, so we start on the Contracts Act 1950, and then we cover on standard form of contract that is available in the construction industry lah, yang popular ones. PAM contract 2018, then we have JKR contract 203A. Okay, and then to sum up on contracts, we ended it with the Construction Industry Payment and Adjudication Act 2012, CIPA. And the last part, theme number 4, will be on services. Okay, we cover on services, which is on the Water Services Industry Act 2006, and then Electricity Supply Act, and then we go also into gas. So that sums up the summary of IR 2024. It is open not just for engineering graduates, it is also open for people within the construction industry, our very own community. And the purpose of this webinar is to create a platform to bridge everyone together. To be honest with you, I received a positive feedback when architects, I'm an architect myself, joining IR 2024. One of them highlighted that one of their clients invited this architect to assist in tender evaluation. So they receive applications, tenders from many engineering consultancy practice. And then while doing the evaluation, because this architect has attended Datuk Kizrul and IR Chen Tiam Leong's class on BM scale of fee, when they do the evaluation of the fee, this architect she knew how to calculate the engineer's fee already. So bila dia tengok tender tu, dia tengok ada yang letak far below the BM scale of fee. So this architect recommended to this client lah. Dia kata, okay, please reject this engineer because he violates his own Act 138. It actually helps when other profession also learning the law, the governing law of other professions. Okay. For information, not IR 2023, IR 2024. It is a not-for-profit webinar initiated by a team of practicing architects and PEPC, organized by Amy Roslan Atelier Consultant. So we are a registered training consultancy under SSM, and this is the fourth edition of IR webinar series. So the objective of the webinar, we would like to create a platform to encourage an interprofessional dialogue and knowledge sharing among the construction industry community, and also to provide an affordable peer learning in relevant laws related to the construction industry. So we only charge 20 ringgit per person for a commitment fee only. If you want to know, 6 years ago, before I started this IR class, I had AR class. I used to do it for free. So, you know, when you do things for free, people took things for granted. There was one day, there was a group of 10 graduate architects requested me to have this class for them. So I prepared all my presentation slides, kan, dah buat cantik. I even did their past year question, you know, for architects, we have LAM Part 3 examination, just to assist these people. And then on that day, one by one did not turn up. Try to imagine, I spent hours of preparing my slide to assist people. And then on that particular day, bukan seorang dua tak datang tau. 10 tak datang. You know, they send me a text. Hello, Architect Amy. I cannot come today for hari ni ada hari sukan sekolah anak saya lah. The next day, hi Architect Amy, I cannot come today sebab ada kenduri kahwin lah. Macam-macam lah alasan dia. So in the end, 10 tak datang. And I was so frustrated. I was so angry on that day. And then I said to other people lah, we need to charge as a commitment fee. So you put in 20 ringgit before you want to skip the class, you will have a second thought, I've actually paid some token inside this class, it's better for me to attend. Lebih baik attend class daripada pergi kenduri. Okay, so we have been sustaining the same fee for the last 6 years. I mean, not just for IR class, but for our other webinar as well. So far, we do not have any intention to increase the class fee. So far, we can manage with the 20 ringgit per person. We are still able to sustain the run of the webinar series lah. Okay. All right. So IR 2024, it is a BEM pre-approved CPD program. We have already obtained approval from BEM actually through MySet. Each session is granted 3 CPD hours. So if you join all 19 sessions, you'll get 57 CPD hours. So those PEPC yang nak renew 50 CPD hour per year, you already covered this. Dapat lebih lah, 57 you got. So for Malaysian Board of Technologies, we did apply for MBOT CPD as well, but we have not received their approval yet. Dia masih tengah proses, agak lambat sikit lah. So I will update in the WhatsApp group with everyone once we have obtained the CPD hours from MBOT. But I am Amy Roslan Atelier Consultant is an approved training provider, dipanggil ATP under MBOT. So we are not scammers lah, we are legal people registered with MBOT as an approved training provider. Okay, so we would like to thank the Board of Engineers Malaysia, BEM, Suruhanjaya Tenaga Indah Water Consortium, Jabatan Pengarahan dan Saliran Malaysia, Jabatan Kerja Raya Malaysia, Jabatan Keselamatan dan Kesihatan Pekerjaan DOSH, Universiti Teknologi MARA and Infrastructure University Kuala Lumpur for their indirect support and making this webinar easy for us. Okay, so next, I would like to introduce you to our speaker. But before that, a reminder to everyone, in compliance to the Copyright Act 1987 or Act 332, no form of digital, audio, photographic recording is allowed either for distribution, display, or personal keep. Participants' microphone is muted by default. Participants may ask questions or responding to the webinar via the chat box. We have a chat box, so you can type in your questions to Datuk Kizrul along the way if you want to. Sign out form link for CPD, we will share in the chat box at the end of the webinar. At the same time, we will also project a QR code on the screen. So you have to click on the sign out link for you to claim for your CPD, or else it is deemed that you did not attend this webinar. We will share the link at 5 PM around that time. Okay, All right, I would like to introduce our speaker today, Datuk Paduka Engineer Kizrul Abdullah. He is the chairman of BM Disciplinary Committee and the chair of Wetlands International Malaysia. So he graduated from University of Malaya in 1975, obtaining a BEng in civil engineering. He has been involved in the field of water and water resources engineering for more than 40 years. So upon his graduation in 1975, he joined JPS, Department of Irrigation and Drainage Malaysia, and became the Director General in 1997. Until his retirement from the public service in 2007. So he oversaw the development of flood mitigation master plan for KL and also managed the Smart Tunnel project from conception to commissioning. So without further ado, I would like to invite our speaker, Datuk Paduka Kizrul Abdullah, to start his sharing session. Thank you. Datuk, your microphone is muted.
Okay. So thank you, Akita Amy. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. A very good afternoon and a very warm welcome for this series of IR 2024. And thank you to Akita Amy. I think you are providing there's a gap in knowledge. And with this series of IR 2024, it's very good that you are filling up this gap. What I will do is I will share with all the participants with regards to the Registration of Engineers Act, the first part, and then we'll have a break, and then I'll continue with the Registration of Engineers Regulations. Right, so let me just put my PowerPoint on. I don't know if it's on. If it's not on, somebody please scream out now. Right, I'm showing now the title page, which says it's the Registration of Engineers Act 1967. So the first question that people ask is, what is this act? Right? Why do we have an Act of Parliament to register engineers? Right, so this act, officially it's called the Registration of Engineers Act 1967. It is an act passed by the Parliament of Malaysia, and it is passed in the year 1967 as Act number 66.
Sorry, Datuk, the slide is not on.
The slide is not on. There is a slide, but it's not moving.
There's no slide.
There's no slide. Wait. Maybe I have to do some. Probably I've got to go and share it, right? Do you see something now on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. And now I've blown it up full. Okay. If it's not on, then scream again. Right. So I'll go back to first slide. This is the title of my talk, which is on the Registration of Engineers Act 1967. So the first thing, I'm going to do it a little bit in the Q&A thing. I ask a question and I try to give the answer. It's more like a FAQ. So very frequently we get people asking, what is the Registration of Engineers Act 1967? So essentially it is an Act of Parliament. It was enacted by Parliament in the year 1967. Hence, you have the 1967 at the end of the title of the Act. Right. Because it's an Act of Parliament, it is a law passed by Parliament. And this Act is now 57 years old. Older than many of the participants, I guess. Right. So again, FAQ, why did Parliament enact this Act? Right. The reason behind it was before 1967, we didn't have an Act. Malaysia became independent in 1957. and we were moving along like when we were under the British. So in UK, they don't have an act to regulate the profession of engineering. Right? But in the early 1960s, there were a few accidents. I think the most famous one was a building collapse in Chowkit, and 2 people were killed. So there was then concern that anyone can claim they're an engineer, and anyone can then go on and do a design. And if they don't do it properly, it will cause public safety. So what is the purpose of having this act? The main purpose is, one, it is to protect the public by having a law. And when you have a law, then only people, we are trying to control the practice of engineering, because what we do as engineers have a very strong bearing on the safety of the public, on public health, public welfare. And this law says only licensed people can practice engineering. So it is through a law. Secondly, the Act also create a body to regulate the engineers. Right? This regulatory body, and I will go into some detail after this. And thirdly, the Act would allow that regulatory body to make regulations. And regulations are considered as subsidiary law, secondary law, so that the body setup will have these regulations which looks into how we can practice, which looks into what are the qualifications you need to have before we can give you a license to practice, and also to say these are the conduct we require from anybody registered with this regulatory body. So what is in this Act itself? Right? If we look at the contents, the content says the Act comprises of many sections. First, it starts with a preamble. And then there is a part 1, which is called preliminary. There is a part 2, which talks about a board of engineers. There's a part 3, which talks about how we can register engineers, engineering technologies, and inspectors of works. A part 3A, which looks at what is the discipline committee, right? What is the job of the discipline committee? A part 4, which looks at how can we cancel somebody's registration? How can we remove their name from the register? How can we bring back their name to reinstate them again? And then there's a final part, part 5, which is general, covering things which are general in nature. Right. So let's start with the preamble. Every Act of Parliament has a preamble, because when it goes before Parliament, the members of Parliament want to know what is the purpose of the Act. So for the Registration of Engineers Act, the preamble says this is an act, meaning it's a law which Parliament will pass, and the reason for the Act is to allow that we can register. And who can we register? We can register engineers. We can register companies, businesses. Sole proprietorship is a business owned by one owner. A partnership is a business owned by 2 or more partners. And body corporate is a business which is registered with Suruhanjaya Syarikat Malaysia, SSM. Right. So this Act will allow for us to register engineers and register also any business which is going to provide professional engineering services. Right. So this is the main reason for the Act. But this is written by a lawyer. I hope there's no lawyer in our group. But essentially, if we put it into layman language, right, what you see above, what it means is only if you are registered with the Board of Engineers under the Act, only those people registered can provide professional engineering services. Right? If you are not registered with the board, it is against the law to do engineering work or to provide professional engineering services. Right? That's why the Act is called Registration of Engineers Act. Right? Only those registered are allowed to provide professional engineering services. And what is professional engineering services? Section 2 of the Act gives the definition. It means engineering services and advice. And in connection with, if you want to do a feasibility study, you want to do planning, you want to do survey meaning engineering survey, you want to do the design of a building, you want to supervise the construction, you want to operate, you want to maintain, you want to manage engineering works or engineering projects. Right, so it's a very broad definition. That means if you want to do anything which is listed here, you want to carry out feasibility study, you want to do a planning of a flood project, you want to do a design of a bridge, you want to operate a power station, you want to maintain, you want to manage, all of this is considered as providing professional engineering services. Right. So it's very broad, but in the Act itself, there is a catch-all which says the board can add other things to it. Now, secondly, the Act talks about engineering works, right? Providing professional engineering services for engineering works. So what is this meaning of engineering works? Right? Engineering works means any type of work, whether it is owned by government or by the private sector. And this includes public utilities, electricity supply, water supply. It includes buildings. You want to build a building, you want to build a house, you want to build an office block. It includes machines, right? It includes equipment, processes, works or projects. And all of this, if it requires us to apply engineering principles and information. Right, so very broad, anything to do with supplying electricity, where it requires us to apply engineering principles, engineering knowledge. This is called engineering works. Right, so if you want to do work relating to this kind of thing, you have to be registered with the Registration of Engineers Act 1967. Right. Now we come to something which is sometimes confusing to many people. In FAQ, I put it as, what is this Board of Engineers, right? We hear a lot, Board of Engineers. I'm talking about the Registration of Engineers Act, but you probably have heard about Board of Engineers more than the Registration of Engineers Act. So what is this thing called the Board of Engineers? Or who is it? So there are two definitions for the Board of Engineers. The first definition is the Board of Engineers is a body corporate. A body corporate means a body, any kind of organization which is legally incorporated. Right. So if you look back at the Act, subsection 3(1) says, under this Act, it says, there shall be established a board called the Board of Engineers. And the Board of Engineers is a body corporate, right? It's got perpetual succession. That means it lives forever until it goes bankrupt, right? So, and it has a common seal. It can sue, and you can sue the board. Right? Many of you are not aware, but if you're not happy, you think the board is doing something, it doesn't have the powers, you can take the board to court, right? So the board can sue you, but you can also sue the Board of Engineers. So in this case, the word Board of Engineers means the name of the organization, right? Name of the organization meaning like if you work for a company ABC. So ABC is a body corporate. It's registered with SSM. It continues until the business closed down. The business can sue you. You can sue the business. Right. So the Board of Engineers, although it's set up under a law and Act of Parliament, it operates in the same way a company operates. Right. It's a body corporate. It can sue. It can be sued. Right. So a body corporate is a term used to refer to a company or a government department or agency. Right. It can refer to a company. It can refer to a government department. It can refer to an authority like Majlis Perbandaran Petaling Jaya, and a body corporate in law is equivalent to us. Right? So all of us as natural person, we have certain legal rights. We can open a bank account. Right? So, but a company is not a person. So a company has to be incorporated before it can then act like an entity. So the body corporate then exists that legally, right, a person is recognized in law. We are recognized as a citizen, right? So a company is also recognized as a legal entity. The second way of looking at the word Board of Engineers is when the word Board of Engineers is used in the Act when it refers to the Board of Directors. Like every company has a Board of Directors. And so for the Board of Engineers, because it's also a corporate entity, it has a Board of Directors. And this Board of Directors is called Board of Engineers Malaysia. I wish at that time in 1967, they would have chosen a different name. Like maybe they can still call the body corporate as Board of Engineers, and maybe the people who are in the Board of Directors, they could just call it the board. But they use the same word, and so sometimes it becomes confusing to people. Right, so in subsection 3.2, they use the word the board. Now here the board, because now it's talking about people. So the board means the Board of Directors for the Board of Engineers. Right, so this Board of Directors must be Malaysian citizen, and they are appointed by the minister. And the minister responsible for the Board of Engineers is the Minister of Works. So the Act says, in this Board of Directors, there must be a president. For company, you have a chairman of the board. For the Board of Engineers, we have a president. Right, so the chair of the Board of Directors is called the president. He must be either a professional engineer or a professional engineer with practicing certificate. Right, I'll talk later about the difference between a PE and a PEPC. Right, so the Board of Directors will consist of a chairman called the president. It will also consist of 14 members who sit in the board, right? Board of Directors. And of these 14 members, they also must be engineers. So they must be either professional engineers or professional engineers with practicing certificate. And out of the 14, 5 of them will be nominated by the Council of the Institution of Engineers Malaysia, or IEM. There shall be one member who will be nominated from the Board of Architects. Right, so the Board of Architects will nominate an architect to sit on the Board of Engineers, and there's another member who comes from the Board of Quantity Surveyor. And this is because all the three boards, Board of Engineers, Board of Architect, Board of Quantity Surveyors, they are all in the same industry, in the construction industry, and all the three boards are appointed by and come under the same minister, which is the Minister of Works. So we know now that the board must have a chairman called the president. There must be 14 engineers in it. There is one architect and there is one QS. So the board has 17 members in the board. But the 14 people who are engineers, the Act also specify how do we pick these 14 engineers. Right? So the Act says 5 of them must be working for the public service for the federal government. Right? 5 of them must be engineers, of which 3 are PEs and 2 are PEPCs. They must be working for the federal government. Right? So federal government, we have JKR, we have JPS, we have a number of public service for the federal government. Right? Another 2 will be in the service of the local authority or a statutory authority. Right? Local authority can be the majlis that we all deal with. Statutory authority can be an authority like SPAN. SPAN is an authority set up to look at water services. Right. So remember I said 14 engineers, one president who is an engineer, one architect, one QS. So out of these 14 engineers, half of them, 5 must be in the federal government, 2 must be working for local authority or statutory authority. Right. So at the time the board was formed, government had the intention, half the members of the board must be engineers working in the public service. And then the other half, and of the other half, 5 of them must be working in an ECP. ECP is an engineering consultancy firm. Right. So 5 of them must be PEPCs. They must be working for an ECP, or they are the owner, or they are the partner, or they are the director of an ECP. Right. And then another 2, remember 14 people, so 5 plus 2 must be working for government or from local authority, and then 5 the other half from the private sector, 5 must be working for ECP, and then 2 engineers. One is a PE, one is a PPC, and they are employed by company or by an association or whatever, but they are not employed by government. Right? So half the engineers, half the 14 engineers work in government or work for government. And half of them, 7 engineers, are not working for government. Right? So the board, when it started, it tries to have a 1-to-1 ratio so that we don't have too much decision making going to government employees or too much going to the private sector. And then the Act also says when we are appointed to the board, we hold office for a term. Each time we are appointed, it must be for a term which is not more than 3 years. But we can be reappointed. Right. So sometimes the board appoints someone for 1 year, sometimes for a 2-year term, sometimes for a 3-year term. Right. But at the end of the 1 year, he can be eligible to be reappointed, provided there is another subsection which says no one in the board, including the chairman, the president, no one can serve for more than 5 years in a row, right? Not more than 5 consecutive years. So the president can be appointed. He can first be appointed for 3 years. He can then be reappointed for another 2 years, and then he must take a break. Right? So he cannot serve. No one can serve more than 5 years in a row. You have to take a break before you can come back. What is the function of this board of directors or the board of engineers? Right, so the function of the board is one, to keep and to maintain the register. Right, the act is called the Registration of Engineers Act, and therefore there is a register, and when people register with the board of engineers, their names will go into the register. So the main function of the board, in line with the objective of the Act, is to have a register and to put our names in it, and if there's any changes, to update the record in the register. Secondly, the function of the board is people apply to be registered, because if you're not registered, remember, you cannot do anything related to engineering. Right, so if you graduate as an engineer, you want to work as an engineer. So you have to apply to the board to be registered with the board. And so the second function of the board is to look at application. If you qualify, to approve your registration. If you don't qualify, to reject your application. Thirdly, the board has the powers to give penalties. It can give you a warning letter. It can fine you, and we'll talk about that more in detail later. The board can suspend your registration, can cancel your registration, can remove your name from the register, can bring back your name from the register. That's the function of the board. Number 4, the function of the board is also to fix the scale of fees. Right. Again, we'll talk a bit more about scale of fees, because there's also some misunderstanding about what is the scale of fees. Number 5E, the board will hear and make a decision if there's any dispute relating to the conduct of registered person. Right. So if you are registered the board and you commit an offense, right? So the board has the power to look into the dispute and to punish you if need be, or to relieve you that there is no infringement. Then we have a EA. When you see something with the A, it means this came later. So the A to E is in the original act. And then somewhere in between, the board added more things. So under EA, the board can act as a stakeholder in a contract when requested to act as a stakeholder. EB, the board can employ people to assist the board. But if it's not in the act, the board, although it has the power to punish us, but for the board to employ people, it must be put in the act itself. EC, the board also will provide facilities to promote learning and education, right? Or to make people be aware of professional development programs and CPD, Continuing Professional Development Programs, right? Because the board finds it's very important as registered person, we must always be up to date. You know, the knowledge is progressing so fast. By the time knowledge is put into a textbook, it is already maybe half of the things are already out of date. By the time we graduate and after we work for 5 years, what we learn is already out of date. So the board finds it's very important. Registered engineers, we must continue to update our knowledge based on what is happening in the profession. Right. The board can also appoint a committee to conduct the PAE. PAE is the Professional Assessment Examination. The board will also appoint another committee to conduct the Professional Competency Exam. Right, so the board at the moment has 2 exams. For a graduate to become a professional engineer, you have to sit for a PAE. And once you become a professional engineer, if you want to become a PEPC, you have to sit for another exam called the PCE, the Professional Competency Exam. So sorry, because in university they never tell us this. Like, kita pergi university, we study hard, we pass the exam. When we come out, then only they tell you, oh, you still have to pass another exam if you want to be a professional engineer. And again, another exam if you want to have a license to practice. Right. Under EE, the board can appoint any person to represent the board in a committee or in a panel or in an institution. Right. So sometimes when the government wants to come up with a new policy on construction, the government will ask the board, can you send a representative? So this part EE, gives the board the powers to appoint someone to represent the board in this kind of committee. EF, the board can appoint a body, that means a number of people, and this body, it can be a committee, it can be a work group. So the body consisting of people, members of the board, consists of professional engineers, consists of other people as the board think is needed to advise the government and the public on matters relating to engineering education. So essentially what the board does is, the board will set out what, if we want to register the board, we must have the right qualification. To know what the right qualification is, the board set up a body called the EAC, Engineering Accreditation Body, and their job, the EAC, is to look at the university program and to make sure that it is up to the standard required under the Registration of Engineers Act. So the board can also recognize exams conducted by other people if the board recognizes those institutions. The function of the board under F is the board can regulate the conduct and the ethics of the profession. And I'll talk about this in the second part of my talk when I talk about the Registration of Engineers regulations. And G, the board can do anything which is necessary so that it can carry out its work as provided for under the Act itself. Right. So who or what does the board register? Right. We have heard the board was set up to register people. We know there is a register. One of the functions of the board is to approve applications so that your name can go into the register. So what kind of register does the board keep? Like the X says, the register will consist of a part A. And part A will have the name, the address, and other particulars. The board will have your IC number, will have your degree, which university you graduated from, the field of engineering or the branch of engineering. Right, all of these will be put into against your name in part A. So all professional engineers registered to the board, you can find their names, their address, their qualification, and so on under Part A of the register. Secondly, the board has a Part B, where again, we take the names, the address, the other particulars, but this time of graduate engineers. Right, so anyone registered as a graduate engineer, their name would appear in Part B of the register. Part C was cancelled because it was referring to temporary registration, and we have removed that some time ago. So now Part D is on Engineering Consultancy Practice, ECP. Part E looks at accredited checkers. Part F looks at PEPC. Part G looks at engineering technologies. And Part H looks at Inspector of Works. Right. So the register, that means the board will register our names in the relevant part of the register. Right. PE go into Part A, GE goes into Part B, ECP goes into Part D, and so on. Right. And I will go into more details about what we can do if we are registered, say, as an accredited checker. So the Act also requires that against our name in the register, the registrar must put in what is the branch or the branches of engineering that we are qualified, right? Because engineering is such a broad subject. Actually, everything you need an input from engineers. Right. So we know engineers, we have civil engineers, we have electrical engineers, we have mechanical engineers, we have chemical engineers, and we have a whole list of other type of engineers. Right. So the Act says in the register against our name, the registrar must also put in which branch of engineering we are registered in. And whether there is some restriction to our registration. So who looks after the register? Right? You can see the Act is called the Registration of Engineers Act. The whole thing on the Act starts with the register. So who is the person looking after the register? Is it the president? No. The Act says the minister will appoint the registrar. So the registrar is the person responsible for the registration. And now we know that there are 7 parts. So what is it that we can do if we are registered with the Board of Engineers? Like the whole basis is, if you're not registered, you can't do engineering. But if you are registered, what else can you do? Right? Entitlement is something you have a right. Kita ada hak. Bila kita berdaftar dengan lembaga jurutera di bawah undang-undang tu, kita ada hak. Hak yang asal tu, kita ada hak untuk menyediakan professional engineering services. Right? The Act says, if you are registered as a PEPC, you have an entitlement. You have a right to be able to do some certain things. Right. So again, I go back to the register. Remember, 7 parts. from part A to part H, and I also said part C was cancelled. So the rest of it then ran out a little bit. So part A to part H, and I will go through one by one what that person under that part is entitled to do. Right. So let me start with the graduate engineer. Right. Then I will talk about the professional engineer, and then I will talk about the professional engineer with practicing certificate. Right. So we all will come in, will register ourselves. We will all start as a graduate engineer. It doesn't matter even if you are Nobel Prize winner. We will register you under graduate first. From graduate, you can become a PE. From a PE, you can become a PE PC. And then you can become a checker. And after that, we had a new category for engineering technologies. And we have a category for inspector of works. Right? So number 1 to number 6, these are all for people, natural person. Is called ECP. And ECP is not a natural person, but a legal body corporate. That means a body which is legal in law, but it is not an individual, it's not a person. So first one is on graduate engineer. So what are you entitled to? What can you do if you are registered as a graduate engineer? Right? Subsection 7.2 says, a graduate engineer, if you register with the board, you can then be employed, and in your employment, you can perform professional engineering services. Right? You remember, professional engineering services means the services you can give for an engineering project. And an engineering project is any type of project, whether private or public, where you need to apply engineering knowledge. Right? So if you are registered with the board first check your qualification, and if the board is satisfied your qualification meets the requirements under the Act, then the board will register you as a graduate engineer, and once you are registered, you can be employed to perform professional engineering services. Also, under section 7.1b, a graduate engineer can describe himself or can carry the title using the abbreviation grad eng. Right? So if you are a graduate engineer, you can use grad eng after your name. And number 2, what now that you have passed the PAE, so now you're a professional engineer, what can you do? Right, so subsection 7.1 says a professional engineer can take up employment, can be employed to carry out or to perform professional engineering services. But B, you can then call yourself a professional engineer. Right? Using the word in English, professional engineer, or the equivalent in any other language. Right? So you can call yourself, saya seorang jurutera profesional yang berdaftar dengan Lembaga Jurutera Malaysia. Right? You can also use words not in English but in some other language to imply that you are a professional engineer. Like I said, you can use the same word in Bahasa Malaysia to tell people I am a professional engineer. You can now use that famous title IR in front of your name, before your name, and the abbreviation behind your name, after your name, P full stop Eng. If you become a professional engineer, you can then call yourself Engineer AAA, and you can then put after your name PE for our engineers. Right. So the title IR is before your name, the PN is after your name. Secondly, you can also use a name card. You can put out a signboard, right? You can put in front of your office a signboard to say, this is the office of a professional engineer. You can also use the board now allows you to use a stamp, right, as may be determined by the board. The board came out with a circular in 2015 to say this is the stamp that you can use as a professional engineer, right? It's a hexagonal stamp. It's got 6 sides, and it has your name. It will have your registration number, your branch of engineering, and it will say you are a professional engineer in Malaysia. Also, as a PE, you can submit plans or drawings, right? So you can actually submit plans or drawings to an authority or to a person in Malaysia where the plans and the drawings are in relation to an equipment, a plant, like a factory, or a product which is either invented by you or sold by you or sold by your employer. Except that the employer is not a client. Now we look at the third one. What are the entitlement of a PEPC? Right, so if you are PEPC, you can practice, you can do business, or you can be employed to perform professional engineering services. Right, the graduate and the PE can only be employed. They cannot do business, they cannot practice. You can, of course, call yourself a PEPC or the equivalent in any other language. Right? You can also use other words which people would understand it to mean you are a professional engineer with practicing certificate. Right? Again, you can use, you can put in your signboard, you can carry a name card which says, which gives your name, and after that to say you are a PEPC. And then number 4, you can take your client to court if they don't pay you, right? Your fee. Right? So if you're not registered with the board and you illegally carry out doing a design, and then the client refuse to pay you, you cannot take him to court. Right, so this is given to the PEPC. The PEPC by law can take a client to court if the client did not pay him his fees. So the PEPC is entitled to use the common circular stamp, right, with the words PEPC on top, the branch of engineering, then the name of the engineer, and then below that the registration number. Right. Section 8 says a PEPC who is living in Malaysia and practicing in Malaysia is entitled to submit what? Submit plans, engineering surveys, drawings, schemes, proposals, reports, design, and studies to any person or any authority. Person in law can mean an individual. It can also mean a company. It can mean an NGO and an organization. So the meaning of person is very broad in law. 8.2 says the PEPC has this right to submit plans and so on, but he can only submit these plans to a person or authority in the branch of engineering only. Right. So now, after I get my PEPC, the board will say, in my case, you can practice in civil engineering. Right. So even though I'm a PPC, I cannot do electrical engineering work because I am not qualified to do that. Also, the law also allows you to make valuations, right, of any structure, plant, machinery, equipment in connection with our practice. This is put in because the Parliament passed another act which says only valuers can make valuation, but it doesn't stop professional engineers to make valuations. Number 4 is an accredited checker. What can an accredited checker do? Right, the Act says no person, unless he's an accredited checker, can perform the duties as may be prescribed under this Act. Right, and the board has come out with a circular which tells what are the things prescribed under this Act. Okay. So only an accredited checker can do this thing. No one else can. That's how the board, the law is worded. No person can do it unless he is first registered with the board as an accredited checker. So we have also put into one of our circulars, circular number 10. Circular number 10 says, from time to time, the board will remind people, even though you are now already a PEPC, you must still remember you can only act in that branch of engineering that you are registered with. And circular number 10 then tells what the accredited checker can do, right? What is meant by checking, what is meant by reviewing the work of another engineer. Right? So the board says, if you do checking, it is where the local authority requires under their law, the building must be checked. And checking means go back through the design, go and look at the construction stage, and only an accredited checker can do all of this. Right? So they can check the design, they can check during construction that everything is okay. They can review, and the circular also says very clearly that sometimes the local authority will require a client to employ a geotechnical expert or checker to prepare a geotechnical report if the work involves a slope where the gradient is more than 25%. and the total vertical height is more than 10 meters. So this was also amended in the Drainage, Street and Building Act. So as the thing stands, if the contractor is going to construct a slope where the gradient is more than 25% degrees and the height of the slope is more than 10 meters, then under the Street Drainage and Building Act, the local authority can require an engineer to do the report and to get a checker to do the checking. Right. So we have seen the graduate engineer number 1, the PE number 2, PEPC number 3, the checker number 4, and number 5 is what are the entitlement of an engineering technologist. Right. So first we need to look what can you do if you are registered as an engineering technologist. Right? You are allowed to be employed where you can then, under the employment, you can then perform professional engineering services. Secondly, as an engineering technologist, you can now use the prefix before your name, EngTech. And after your name, you can use MIE. I don't know how many of you are aware or how many of you want it, but an engineering technologist can do this. So like a graduate engineer, an engineering technologist can put EngTech after his name. Number 6 covers the inspector of works. So what can an inspector of works do? An inspector of works can be employed, and under his job, he can assist the PE to supervise engineering works. Right. Every design by a PE or a PEPC must somehow be checked by the same PE. So now the board wants people who are doing as an inspector of works, they must be registered, and in the register, we will fill in your qualification. And finally, number 7 is on a term called ECP. It is the only term of the 7 that don't refer to a natural person. Right? So it talks about this name called ECP, Engineering Consultancy Practice. So under the definition, it means an engineering consultancy practice means a sole proprietorship, a partnership, a body corporate, and they are all entitled to provide professional engineering services if they are registered with the Board of Engineers. So if you are registered, then you can provide professional engineering services. If you are not registered, then your company or your business, it is illegal to work as an engineer, and you can be subject to very severe punishment, including a jail term. Right, so if you are registered under 7A, 7A says the board shall register a business. If one owner is called a sole proprietorship, if you have as owners 2 or more partners, or in a body corporate, you have the board of directors. So the board will register that company as an ECP if the sole proprietor, the main owner, is a PEPC. Right? Secondly, if it is a partnership all the partners must be PEPCs. And thirdly, if it's a company, a body corporate, the board requires that the board of directors of the body corporate, of the company, must have this term. At least 2/3 of the directors must be PEPCs. Right, so if you have a board of directors, you have 9 people, at least 2/3 must be PEPCs. The remaining 1/3 can be any person, can be a PE, can be a IOW, can be a non-engineer. Right? The board allows the public to become a member of the board of directors, provided 2/3 must be PEPCs. Right? And then one of the PEPCs in the board is called the person named under subsection 7A3 C4. Right. So this the board will register a sole proprietorship if the shareholdings are as prescribed by the board. And at the moment the board says anyone can hold your share. Right? The board says this is a company, anyone can hold the shares. It can be any person to hold the shares. Okay. It can be any body corporate incorporated as a company, or it can be any combination of person and body corporate. And then in terms of paid up capital, the board says the paid up capital can be 50,000 ringgit. Right? This is the minimum. When you set up a company, you must put into your MOU how much of your money you want to put in as capital. And the board says if you want to register your company as an ECP, you must first have in your constitution of your company that the minimum paid up capital is 50,000 ringgit. Right? So this is the minimum amount of money an ECP must have before it can go and start business. Secondly, the day-to-day affairs, meaning the CEO. The CEO of the company must be a person who is a PEPC, and he must be authorized by the board of directors that he makes all the final engineering decisions relating to professional engineering services. What are the entitlement of an ECP? First, the ECP may incorporate four titles, but in actual fact, what it does is, just now I pressed too long onto my mouse, right? So I was in this process talking about the board of directors, right? So the entitlement of a ECP, right? One is they can charge, they can recover in court their fees, just like a PEPC. So if you are not registered and your company do the design and the client refuse to pay you, you cannot go to court and recover your fees. Only if you are registered with the board as an ECP. Okay. Right. Section 8 says also that the ECP who is registered can only submit their plans, their drawings, their designs they can submit to any person or any authority. Right. So 8.1 gives two type of category of people. The PPC and the ECP, they are entitled to submit, to do work and submit it to any authority in Malaysia. Right. So, and again, the right of doing it is based on the branch of engineering in which the PEPC in the ECP is qualified. And so, but the ECP is also allowed to do valuation, just like the professional engineer with practicing certificate. Now you have seen what we are entitled to if we are registered with the board. But what are the obligations? What do we have to do as a registered person? Like first, you have an obligation to renew your registration if you want to continue to work as an engineer. Right? So, because the certificate of registration that is given to you will expire on 31st of December each year, except for the graduate engineer and the engineering technologies, because for them, they register once and it is for life. They don't have to come back every year to renew their certificate. But everyone else have to do that, and that certificate will expire on 31st of December. But you can renew it every year. So for the IOW, his certificate is for 3 years. So it will only expire on 31st December of year number 3. Right? If you register this year, then it covers you for 2024, 2025, and 2026. And then in 2027, you have to come back again to renew your certificate of registration. Subsection 16 allows for how our name can be removed. So if we forgot to renew our registration, if we fail to renew within 1 month of the date, then the registrar will remove our name from the register. And so if an ECP, if you fail to renew it for not more than 3 years, that means you forgot to renew for this year, you also didn't renew for next year, and the year after that, up to 3 years, if you did not renew, then you come back and you want to renew, then in the act it says all you need to do is to tell the registrar, I want to be reinstated. I want my name to come back onto the register. And the register, provided you pay the fees and you satisfy all the conditions, the register must reinstate you. He has no say in whether you should or you should not get your renewal. Right? So don't forget this. If somehow you didn't renew for 1 year, and then you didn't renew for up to 3 years, all you need to do is tell the registrar, I now want to come back, and he must reinstate your name. But if you forget to renew for more than 3 years, right, then you have to apply to the board and you have to tell the board, why didn't you do it for the last 3 years? And then the board will look at your reason. And only if the board is satisfied with the reason and that you have paid all the due fees, Right? The board must be satisfied before the board will issue a new certificate of registration to you. How much is it? Right? Under the Act, if we want to apply to be a graduate engineer, for a professional engineer, the processing fee and the renewal is 200 ringgit a year. Okay, so when you pay for this year, it expires 31st December, end of this year. If you want to renew, you have to pay 200 ringgit. Right? If you forget to pay and you want to be reinstated, the fee is 1,250. There's a very big penalty if you forget to renew. Same thing for PEPC. PEPC pays 400 a year. But again, if they forgot, then to get their names back again, they have to pay 1,450 ringgit. Right? For ECP, body corporate, they pay 1,000 each year. But if they lapse in their renewal and they want to come back again, they have to pay 6,050 ringgit. Right, so for body corporate, the penalty is 6 times. For partnership, renewal is 500. The reinstatement is 10 times bigger. For sole proprietorship, renewal is 250. But if you don't renew, you have to pay 5,300 for your name to come back into the register. So first, you must renew your registration. Secondly, if you change your address, right, Section 14 says, if we change our address, we have to notify the registrar within 3 months of the change. Something went wrong with my that, it sort of jumped. I think what I have to do is I've got to right. So I was at the point where the renewal, right? So in the renewal, right, I was looking at first, I looked at what the entitlement of a ECP, and then I talked about the renewal. If we didn't renew, there's a big penalty, right? And I showed you the schedule, the table, right? So I was at this point. You see something went wrong, and then it suddenly jumped almost to the end of my file. Right, so body corporate renewal is 1,000, reinstatement is 6,000. Partnership renewal is 500, penalty is 5,500. Sole proprietorship renewal is 250, but reinstatement is 5,300. Then I said, you have to tell the registrar if you change your address. And you've got to do it within 3 months of the change of address. Right? And then thirdly, if you are registered, you have to obey the code of conduct. Right? Are there any restriction on employing unregistered people? Yes. Right. So the Act says only people who are registered are allowed to provide professional engineering services. So if you are not registered with the board, you cannot provide this. You are not allowed to provide professional engineering services. It would be an infringement of the Act. Right. And Section 24A says a company cannot employ you if you are, if a company or a person wants someone to do professional engineering services, they must employ a registered person. Right? If they don't employ a registered person, then it becomes an offense for the company as well. And what are the penalties if you infringe on the Act? Infringement means you do something which is against the law. And there are two types of infringement. One is if we are registered with the board. And secondly, if we are not registered with the board. So if we are registered with the board, then the board says the disciplinary committee shall conduct hearing. Right? And the disciplinary committee, if finds you guilty, can issue the following penalty. The disciplinary committee, the DC, can give you a written reprimand. Reprimand is teguran. We can fine you up to 50,000 ringgit. We can suspend your registration for up to 2 years, or we can cancel your registration. Right? For ECP, it's the same. The board can, if you give the ECP a reprimand, can fine up to 50,000, can suspend for up to 2 years, or can cancel the registration of the ECP. And if you refuse to pay, right, then under the Act, it becomes another offense. You are guilty of another offense, and you have to, there's another additional penalty of 10,000 ringgit fine for individual or 50,000 ringgit for ECP. Now, if you are not registered with the board, right, and then you get your registration through you give a fake certificate, right? You forge or you counterfeit a certificate, or you use a forged certificate, you impersonate a registered person, you fraudulently obtain your certificate, you sell a certificate, you contravene Section 5 and 8, then the penalty is a fine of up to 50,000 or imprisonment, right? So if you are registered with the board, the most severe penalty we can do is we can cancel your registration. If you are not registered but you work as an engineer, the penalty is a fine of 50,000 and can include imprisonment of up to 3 years or both. Right. So anyone who contravenes this Act, and if there's no penalty provided for, the fine is 10,000, and the imprisonment, the term of prison is 1 year or both. So if your company commits an offense, then the Act says the owner or the partner or the director or the manager of the secretary is guilty of that offense and liable to the same penalty unless he shows the offense was committed without his knowledge. So with that, I'll just do a quick quiz just to see whether you understand so far. So the first question is, we have somebody, Mr. AAA. He graduated from a recognized university in Malaysia. Is it compulsory for him to register with Board of Engineers? Yes or no? Right. Put on your raised hand if you say yes. Right. I see many of you say yes, but actually the answer is yes if you want to work as an engineer. But you don't have to register if you don't want to work as an engineer. Right. Second question. So this person, he wants to be an engineer. He wants to work as an engineer. So he registered with board as a graduate engineer. And then he decided to print his name card. Then he says, well, I'm entitled to have G Eng after my name, but maybe people don't understand what it is. So I put IR in front of my name. Right. So has he committed an offense? Again, if you think he has committed an offense, click on the raise hand. Right. Now let's see. Is it an offense? Our Act says only a professional engineer can call himself and can use the abbreviation IR before his name. Right. Here, our friend is a graduate engineer. Right. But subsection 7.1b says he cannot use or display. Right. So the keyword is use or display. That means you show. Right. You show your card. So he has printed a name card. He has used IR. So has he committed an offense? If he uses it or if he displays it, then yes, he has committed an offense. If he just printed but he didn't show to anybody, he just want to admire how it will look when he become a IR later, right? If you don't show to anybody, then it is not an offense. Then he realized, I print the card, but I can't show people, so I'm wasting my money just to shock sendiri. So he decided to change the name card. He now put ENGR in front of his name and grad Eng after his name. Right. Again, has he committed an offense? Right. Again, press on the raise hand if you think he has committed an offense. Right. Right. Again, here, if he use it, then it's an offense, right? But if he imply he is a professional engineer, right? So when you have the word ENGR in front of your name, you are in a sense implying, because you know the grad Eng, the graduate is not entitled to have a title in front of his name. Right. So if you want to be safe, you should use grad Eng in front of your name. Right. So now we are at the Q&A, and I have to check with Architect Amy. Are there any questions from the participants?
Hi, Datuk Paduka. Yes, we have quite a number of questions in the chat box. Not sure whether you are able to access the chat box.
I don't want to touch anything.
Okay, let me just read the question.
Yeah, it's better you read it out, then I'll give the answer.
Okay. All right. So the first question from Yi Chun Tae. Afternoon, Datuk Paduka. How about multidisciplinary practices? Is it covered under Act 138?
Yes. I only talked about under the ECP, the engineering consultancy practice, there are two categories. One is where the ECP is purely made up of engineers and doing engineering work. The Act also provides for a multidisciplinary ECP. Right? There are not many of them. That's why I didn't go into it. And the multidisciplinary is that we allow, because we also know in today's world, many projects, especially the big projects, they require input from not just the engineer, but also the architect and the QS. So the board allows for engineers and architects and QS, they can come together and they can form an ECP for multidisciplinary. Right? And then there are certain conditions. The engineers must hold 20% of the shareholdings. So the multidisciplinary ECP can do engineering, can also do architectural work, and can also work as a QS. So my apologies that because there are very few of them. I think we only have a handful, about 10 to 15 such ECPs. So I didn't talk about it. Right, okay. Next question.
All right, the next question from Tanis. Is charging higher than the limit of the scale of fees acceptable?
Yes. The scale of fees actually tells the minimum fee you can charge. Right. So if you charge more than the minimum fees, it's okay. The scale of fees was set up because the board realized that for an engineer to do the work, you must have certain amount of resources to go in. And so you need to have enough people to do the type of work, and it's related to the scope and the complexity of the job. So that is the minimum fee you have to charge. Otherwise, you cannot do a good job. Right? So, but if you charge more than that, it's okay. It's not an offense. Right, next.
Okay, next question. Where can we refer to the role of the inspector of work, and can they certify VO, variation order?
No. The inspector of work's role is to assist the professional engineer in the supervision of works. Right, so the engineer is responsible for the design and responsible that his design is constructed in accordance with the design. So, so he is actually employed normally. He is engaged to design and supervise a project. But we also know the engineer himself cannot supervise everywhere and everything. So the engineer is allowed to delegate the supervision to his engineers or to an inspector of works. Right, so the job of the engineer and the IOW in supervision is just to make sure the construction is done in accordance with the construction drawings. He is not entitled to do more than that. Okay, next.
Okay, next question from Lim Kok Tong. Is there limitation on the branch of IOW? For example, an IOW can supervise on civil work and mechanical work at the same construction project at the same time?
Yes, we also register them in accordance with the branch of engineering. Because a civil trained IOW would not be in a position to supervise electrical works. So we do register them, but only in the three main branches. For example, we don't register IOW for automotive engineering. So it's meant for supervision generally in the construction industry. Okay.
All right, next question from Yi Chun Tae. Okay, Datuk Paduka, for reinstatement, how about the CPD requirements for the past 3 years? Should PEPC and PE need to meet the minimum CPD requirements for every year in order to be reinstated? If he or she forgot to register for 2 years, for example, should he comply with minimum 50 CPD for PE and 100 CPD for PEPC?
The requirement is it's subject to the conditions. So the board will look back at each individual and look at how much or what other conditions to impose. So it would depend on the individual. If that individual has been consistent earlier, then the board, for example, if you stop because you went abroad to do your masters, right? So when you come back, then the board would say, even if you continue with your annual fee, you wouldn't need to have CPD hours for the period when you are studying. So it's going to be on a case-by-case look at the individual. Okay, next.
All right, next question from Tian Kian Pin. Datuk Paduka, for a company which is not regulated under Act 138, such as contractor, employ an engineer who is not registered with BEM. Can Act 138 take action to the contractor too?
You see, the company, the contractor employs an engineer. We have to see what is the engineer doing, right? Because the engineer may mean he is not doing any professional engineering services. So if the engineer's role is like a site agent, then no offense has been incurred yet. Not under our act, but under the CIDB Act, now CIDB requires site agent to have certain qualification and to be registered with CIDB. Right. So it all goes back to what is that engineer doing? If that engineer is doing work which is covered in our act, then the engineer has already committed an offense, and the company, the contractor employing him, has also committed an offense. Right? But contractors generally they don't do design, except for temporary design, and we have a different circular on temporary works. Right? So a contractor doing his work, a contractor does not require professional engineering services to be done, right? Because the design is done by the engineer. The engineer provides the contractor with the construction drawings. The contractor's job is to carry out the construction. Right? So if he employs an engineer, it means it's better for him. In fact, most subcontractors don't have engineers. So if now they employ engineers, I think then the engineer is more knowledgeable about the importance, for example, of the cover you require for reinforced concrete works. Right. Then in that case, but it's not part of the contractor's job. Right. So a contractor can do a contract without having any engineer. Right. So if you have an engineer, it makes it better for the contractor. But the engineer is not doing something that that means the engineer is not doing design, is not doing things which are related to the Act. So the quick answer for it is a contractor employing an unregistered engineer would not have committed an offence unless that unregistered engineer is performing the work of providing professional engineering services. Okay.
All right, next question from Tanis. Can an engineer give statements which are factual via the social media?
Yes. But you should be careful, right? You need to be involved in whatever is that you're commenting on. And what you think is factual may not be factual, right? So our rule says if you make any comment, it must be based on facts. But the key point is make sure you know the facts. Right? So, for example, a building collapse. Right? You don't know what actually happened. So we cannot put in social media, oh, that building collapsed because the design was bad, or because the contractor didn't follow the construction drawings. Unless we know for sure those are the facts. Okay.
All right. Next question. This question is actually from me. Can an ECP, engineering consultancy practice, advertise their practice on radio or TV advertisement?
We have a circular on how they can advertise. That's going to come out in my second part.
Okay.
But I don't think it covers advertising through radio.
All right. Okay, next question from Uy Banjuan. If a person registered as a chartered engineer from the UK but did not get IR in Malaysia, and if he uses CEng in the name, does it imply that he is IR and against Act 138?
No, we have got to remember one thing. You can be a chartered engineer in UK. The Act is looking at doing work in Malaysia. Right. So the chartered engineer, if he comes to Malaysia as a holiday, it's perfectly okay to tell people, I am a chartered engineer. If he is working as an engineer in Malaysia, he has to register with the Board of Engineers first. Right? And then the board will look at it. The board will look, does he meet the qualification to be registered? Right? If he meets the requirement and he can be registered as a PE or a PPC, then he's entitled to have the IR. Right? So we are talking about performing in Malaysia. Right? So any qualification you have overseas, when you come back, you can tell people, this is what I am. But you cannot be looking for a job. You cannot be doing jobs. Right? I hope that clarifies the issue.
Okay. Dato', how many minutes that you allocate for the Q&A until that time?
No, are there any more?
Oh yes, there are a lot more.
Okay. What will happen is at the end of it, we might overshoot the 5 p.m. slot, and I'm okay with that.
Okay.
So maybe a good thing would be we can keep those questions to the end.
All right.
Right, and then because some people may already have scheduled, they have something on after 5, and if I take all the questions, I might then not have enough time to cover the regulations. So it's best that I finish with the regulations, and then even if it's after 5, I can take the remaining questions.
Okay, all right, sure then. So the rest of the question we shall keep at the end of the webinar, yeah? All right. Okay, Dato'.
So we'll take a short break. How much time do you normally allow for such breaks?
Usually about 5 minutes.
Okay, so coffee break 5 minutes. We come back at 3:55.
Okay, hi, welcome back everyone. So that's the end of our coffee break. It's 3:55, yeah? So we shall continue with the Registration of Engineers Regulation 1990. So I pass the class to you back, Dato'.
Okay, I don't know whether it's gone off. Am I still on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't touch anything, so if it's not on, it's not my fault. Right. The second part is the Registration of Engineers Regulations 1990. Right. So again, I use like an FAQ. What is this Registration of Engineers Act? And earlier we say it's an act of parliament. So now what is this Registration of Engineers Regulations 1990? It seems very similar, but the year is different. And the word act is now changed with the word regulations. So in legal term, this is called a subsidiary legislation. That means it's a second level legislation. The act is a first level law and the regulation is a second level law. Right, so if you go back to the Interpretation Act, the Interpretation Act is an act of parliament which gives examples of how we should interpret. Right. So in the Interpretation Act, it says the word act means an act of parliament and it refers to a law made by parliament. Right. A subsidiary legislation is a proclamation or regulation or an order or a bylaw, and it is made under an act or an enactment or an ordinance, and it has legislative effect, right? Now the word enactment is a law which is made by the state legislation of Sarawak. The word ordinance is a law made by, enactment is by the state other than Sarawak, because Sarawak, they don't want to follow everybody. So Sarawak used the word ordinance. Right? So any subsidiary legislation must be made under an act. So in this case, if we go back to the act itself, Section 26 says the board may, with the approval of the minister, make regulations, right, to prescribe things so that it can perform its function as set out in the act. Right. So the board then made these regulations and they made it in 1990. And what is in these regulations in 1990? It has a part 1, which is called preliminary. Part 2 looks at administration. Part 3, it looks at registration of registered person. Part 3A, it covers the investigating committee. Part 4 looks at code of conduct. Part 5 looks at registration of ECP. And Part 6 looks at the PAE. And 6A looks at the PCE. Right. And then part 7 is revocation, meaning the early regulation is overtaken by this new one. So part 1, it says this came into operation on 31st of July 2015. The registration of engineers regulations. Part 2, it looks at administration. And it actually talks more about the board itself. If the board wants to hold a meeting, it must give 14 days notice. Right? The board may appoint someone to be the secretary. And so it relates to how the board of engineers should be administered. Part 3 looks at registration of registered people. And so it says, if you want to be registered, you have to make an application to the board in the form which is specified on the board's website. Right? I've gone into the board's website to show you what how it is done. So you need to go into the board's online system called My BEM online system. Right. Under that system, you then click on to registration, and in this case, I put in as a graduate engineer. So the qualification requirements for a graduate engineer is first, you must have an engineering degree awarded by Malaysia and recognized by the Engineering Accreditation Council. If your engineering degree is awarded by another country, then this degree will be looked at whether it is recognized under the Washington Accord. Right. So Malaysia is a signatory of the Washington Accord. The UK, US, Australia, a number of other countries are also signatories. So if your degree is from UK and it is recognized by UK under the Washington Accord, then in Malaysia, we will recognize your degree. Right. Also, if you graduate with an engineering technology degree, right, then this will be is to enable you to register as an engineering technologist. Right. Now we look back at for engineering technologies, right? So I actually first you again the same process happens, right? You must have a qualification which is recognized by Malaysia, and if it is by another country, then we look back that there is another accord called the Sydney Accord. For engineering and engineering-related qualification, there are 3 accords in the world. The first one is the Washington Accord. An accord is like an agreement. So the Washington Accord looks at engineering degrees. The second accord is called the Sydney Accord, and it looks at engineering technology degrees. And the third accord looks at the diploma level, right? For example, the Inspector of Works is not a degree, but it is a diploma level. So for engineering diploma awarded by other country, we look back at, is it covered under the Dublin Accord? Right. So the first thing you do is you need to do your registration online, because the board has now put everything to be done online. After you have applied, then Regulation 17 says the board will make a decision within 4 months. Right. So the board itself has committed the board through subsidiary legislation. That means the board is bound by the 4 months rule. Regulation 18 says when you apply, you must accompany with it a processing fee. Right? And this processing fee is not refundable, meaning if you are unsuccessful, we don't give it back to you. You also must accompany it with a registration fee. Now, this registration fee, if you are not successful, we will give it back to you. Because you are applying for registration, we need to process it. So by processing, we already have done the work of processing. And we find you don't qualify, then we cannot register you. Therefore, we will give you back your registration fee. Right? And there's a table which says what the processing fee is and what the registration fee is. So for graduate engineer, you have to pay a processing fee of 50 ringgit. There is no fee for registration. So once you qualify, we don't charge you anything. For a professional engineer, the processing fee is also 50 ringgit. You will find the processing fee is the same for all, because the amount of work required is almost the same. But when we process for the PE and we find, okay, he is successful, then we would charge him a registration fee of 300 ringgit. Right? So he has to pay both at the time he applies. If he's successful, he becomes registered as a PE. If he's not successful, we give him back the 300 ringgit. We also recognize that the fee is actually for 1 year. So if you apply between 1st of July to 31st of December, then we will only charge you half the registration fee. Like for body corporate, processing fee as always is 50. To register it, the fee is 1,000. Right? So a graduate, when you submit the application to be a PE, you first have to pass the PAE. So after you pass the PAE, you have to submit within 1 year, right? Otherwise, you will have to ask for an extension, or you may have to resit it again, right? So if you pass the PAE or you come through the IAM route, you become a corporate member. You have 1 year to then come to the board to say, I like to register as a PE. Right? If you missed it, then you can still apply for an extension of time. Right? And the board may extend it if you have done it within a reasonable period and the reason you give are acceptable. So once you have registered, the board will then issue you with a certificate of registration. And this certificate of registration will be signed by the president and the registrar, and it will have the seal of the board. Right? We used to do a physical certificate, but then again, as I said, now you apply through online, and your certificate is also issued to you online. Right? So this allows the board to issue your certificate of registration in the form as specified on the board's website. And this is an example of how the registration certificate looks like. So it will say, this is to certify that. We'll put your name, your IC number, your address, right? And you are registered as a graduate engineer. You'll be given a registration number, and the branch of engineering is put into that. And then the president, on the right side, you see the president and the registrar will sign it. And on the left side, they will put the red seal of the board. Then Regulation 20 looks at how you can renew your registration. Right? So the Act is actually saying you have to renew, but how to do it comes under the regulations. It's more detailed. So it says if you want to renew, you must submit to the board an application to renew in the form as specified in the board's website. And then you have to also pay a renewal fee as specified in the schedule. Right. Also, you have to satisfy any such conditions as the board may determine. For example, if you want to renew as a PE, you have to have certain hours of CPD. If you want to renew as a PEPC, I think you have to have more hours in CPD, up to 50 hours a year, or 150 hours spread over 3 years. Right. So if you fail to renew, right, you have to pay a reinstatement fee, because the Act is very clear. If you Oh, something has come up. If you do not pay by 31st of December and the Act allows you 1 month grace period, after by 1st of February, if you still haven't paid, the registrar will remove your name from the register. Not for graduate engineer, because graduate engineer is lifelong. Right? So if you fail to do that, then you have to apply to be reinstated. And I mentioned this when I talked about the Act. And you have to pay a reinstatement fee. And also I've talked about this earlier. Right? So professional engineer, remember, you forget to pay 200, you end up paying a reinstatement fee, which is what? 1,250. The board now realized the penalty is very heavy, and the board has now the board is going to reduce the amount to a more fair amount, but that has not been gazetted yet. Regulation 22 talks about the practical experience that a graduate have to obtain. Right, so it must be 3 years at least, and out of the 3 years, 2 years will be on general training, 1 year will be on our professional career development, right? And of the 3 years, 1 year must be at least 1 year must be in Malaysia, supervised by a PE in the same branch of engineering as the graduate engineer. But when the board feels that what you have given is not sufficient, or the board may exempt you if the board feels that say you have got 3 years, but you only have 6 months in Malaysia, the board may, if it finds that there's enough reason, may exempt you partially on the requirement of 1 full year in Malaysia. The board requires that the graduate has to submit the proof in writing of his practical experience. And now the board has come up with an outcome-based system where there is more details on how you would show your experience in your report. Regulations also talk about how to investigate a complaint. Right? So the regulation 22A says, if somebody wants to make a complaint against a registered person, that complaint must be in writing. Right? And then when the board receives the complaint, the board will look at it. Is there prima facie? Is there sufficient grounds on the complaint? If the board is satisfied it is a real complaint, the board shall then appoint an IC, an investigating committee, to investigate the complaint. And part 4 looks at the code of conduct, and I'm going to spend more time on part 4 because this will affect all of us. Right. On the code of conduct, it covers from regulation 23 to regulation 33. Right. So regulation 23 says, as a registered person, we are required to conduct ourselves honorably, meaning in a way that is honest and fair. We have to commit ourselves responsibly, meaning we have the ability to act correctly. We have to work in an ethical manner. That means what is right and what is wrong, we have to understand, and lawfully. We must do it in a way that the law allows us to do. Right? So if we do our work and we go against any law in the country, you would have breached Regulation 23. Regulation 24 has got 5 parts. The first part says we must do our duty with due skill. That means we have to do it in a good way, do it well. We must do it with due care. Care means we must pay attention to the details, right? The word care comes out with carefully. We have to do it very carefully. We have to do our work with diligence. That means we must be careful to ensure that it is safe, and we do it with good faith, in an honest and in a sincere way. B says, at all times, we must hold paramount. Right? Paramount means more important than anything else. Whatever we do, in our mind, the most important thing when we do our work as an engineer is the safety of the public, the health of the public, the interest of the public. Right? This means if your boss asks you to do something that concerns the safety, you are not allowed to do it. It doesn't matter whether he's your boss or your client, because everything you do, the most important thing is you do it, and you must make sure what you do doesn't affect public safety. Right? Please remember this. You have to take reasonable steps. That means fair and practical steps to make sure that what you do doesn't affect the environment. Right? We are one of the few countries in the world which puts into the code of conduct that the engineer has a duty to try to reduce the bad effects of our work on the environment. Right. Regulation 25 says we have to discharge our duties to our employer or our client with complete fidelity. And fidelity means we have to be loyal to the client. We have to give full support to what the client wants. Right? So essentially it's saying when you work for a client or when you work for your boss, you do the work as if it is for you. Right? If your boss asks you, do a design for a bridge, you must do it like you're doing it for yourself. Right? And you cannot accept payment from anybody else except your client or your employer for what you are doing. Right? Regulation 26 says we cannot maliciously, that means we cannot with bad intention harm the reputation of another engineer. Right? The good name of another engineer. You cannot say, oh, that engineer is a lousy engineer. Right? Regulation 27 says we cannot canvass or solicit employment. Canvass means lobby. We cannot lobby to get a job. Right? Solicit means we cannot try to persuade very, very hard to get the job. We cannot offer any gift or pay a commission to get a job. Right? We cannot advertise in any manner or any form except as permitted by the board. And so this answers Architect Amy's question earlier. The board has actually come up with a circular 005, and the board in that circular makes it clear, here is what you can do in advertising your ability. You can download these circulars from the board's website. The board is very open. You can go to the website, look under circular, and download circular number 005. Right. 27D says, when you do work, you must make sure the scope of what you want to do is clearly defined in a written agreement between you and the client, right? This is partly to protect you because the client only knows I'm engaging an engineer, right? You may be a civil engineer, but the client is saying, I want to build my bungalow. So I employ you as the engineer to do the engineering design for me. So he thinks as a civil engineer, you can do everything. So to protect you, you must have an agreement. I am appointing you to do work and to list out the civil engineering work, right? You will not have in the agreement, it will cover electrical engineering. If you don't have such an agreement, then the client doesn't know, you cannot do other type of engineering. So this is to, in a way, protect the engineer so that the client doesn't have the wrong idea about what you can do. And 27E says you cannot offer, you cannot receive a bribe or a contribution to influence awarding of a contract. Uh, I was interviewed by UIAM actually yesterday morning because they are doing a study for SPRM. So they wanted to know, does the board have in our code of conduct anything on corruption? And I said, yes. Regulation 27E is very clear. We cannot give a bribe, we cannot ask for a bribe, we cannot receive a bribe, either directly or indirectly, meaning you cannot go through a third party, right? Because this will have an effect on influencing awarding of a contract. Right? Give or receive. Regulation 27A is the same as 27, but now this is for an ECP. So A is the same, B offer the give. You cannot advertise except based on the circular. You cannot provide professional services unless it's in a clearly written agreement. You cannot offer, you cannot receive a bribe. Regulation 29 says you cannot be a medium of payment on the client's behalf unless the client asks you to be one, right? That means you cannot enter into a contract, you cannot place an order for something. You know, as an engineer, we are doing it for the client. So the client may ask us, call for tender. So when we call for tender, we also, the tenderers have to pay for the tender documents. Right? So everything connected to the job is for the client. So if you collect any money in relation to the job, it must be through the client's account unless the client allows you to do it on his behalf. Right? Regulation 31 is covering supplanting. Right? Supplanting, the word supplanting means to replace somebody that are on the job. There's already an engineer doing the job. Right? You cannot go and potong jalan. You cannot go and take over that engineer's job. You cannot intervene. Right? Intervene means you want to become involved. So you know the project has been given to an engineer. You cannot go to the client and say, that engineer is lousy. I can do a better job. I can charge you less. Right? You want to intervene. So you are not allowed to intervene. And you cannot take over another engineer's job unless, right? Take over means there's already an engineer on the job. And this engineer is now either the client has sacked him or he has terminated himself the job, right? So you cannot come in and take over unless the the first engineer tells you, I give you my consent, right? So the job has started, an engineer has already been working on it. Now the engineer has decided he wants to quit, or the client has sacked him. Right? Now you are the second engineer and you want to come in. The board says you cannot come in until the first engineer gives you the consent. Consent means agree you can come in. And this consent is in the form of a letter of release. So they'll give you a letter which says, I am now giving you my agreement that you can take over this job from me. Right? There's a second part to it where you've been terminated, but there is this agreement on fees. Right? You said I've done 40% of the job, but the client has only paid me 30%. So I will not give you the letter of consent until I get my 10% payment. Right? So the board says, in such a situation, the client can ask the board to be the stakeholder. So meaning the engineer is claiming 10% of the fee is not paid. So the board will hold that 10% while the first engineer and the client goes into arbitration. In such a situation, then you don't need a letter of consent, then the second engineer can take over the job. Regulation 32 says, if you are a consultant and you've been offered to be a director in a contractor or a manufacturing company, you must first get the approval of the board, right? And if the board gives you the approval, meaning you can now be a director in a contracting company, but you cannot, in any job, you cannot be the director, the consultant, and the contractor at the same job. Right? Always remember, if you are the consultant of a job, you cannot be part of the job as a contractor, except for a design and build project. 33 talks about conflict of interest. So if you are the consultant for your client and you have interest in some companies which is producing product that you will be using in the project, you have to put in writing to the client that I have an interest in this particular company. Right? You have to declare, this is called a conflict of interest. Conflict of interest means you are an interested party. You are the developer, no, you are the consultant. And as the consultant, you are specifying certain type of piles or certain type of chilling plant or air conditioning. Right? And then you are part owner of a company selling air conditioning or chilling plants. Right? You have an interest in that company, so you have to disclose your interest in writing to the client. So that's a code of conduct from regulation 23 to 33. Right? So this actually is the main part of the regulation. The rest are administration, how you can apply and so on. But I'll just very quickly go through the rest of it. So regulation 34 says, if you want to register as a ECP, you have to submit an application as per the board's website, right? And you have to fulfill the requirements. So again, you have to pay a processing fee, you have to pay a registration fee, and I should very quickly go through this because I've gone through many times. It's just that sometimes I'm talking on its own on the regulations, but today I'm covering both the Act and the regulation. So Regulation 34A says who should own the share. So first it says an ECP must have a minimum paid up capital of 50,000 ringgit. And then the 70% of the shares must be held by professional engineers, and the remaining can be held by anybody. And then last year, we amended this. We said, well, it doesn't matter who owns the company, right? The main thing is the engineer. We govern him under a different regulation. So the board agreed to open up the shareholdings to anybody. Right. So now the Act says the ECP must have minimum paid up capital of 50,000, but it can be owned by anybody or any body corporate or any combination of persons and body corporate. Right. And in effect, now the board controls it in a different way. The board says a body corporate like a company, the main thing is the board of directors, right? Because the board of directors decide what to do, what job to take up, what direction to move forward. Right? So the board of directors, at least 2/3 of the members must be PEPCs. Right, so that even if the third member is not a PE, not a PEPC, he cannot overrule the 2/3 members who are PEPCs. Right. So the remaining 1/3 can be any persons. But of the PEPCs, one of them must be a person which is named, and I'll come to that requirement just after this. So when they have applied, then the board shall issue a certificate of registration in the form as specified. And again, the registration certificate is the same for ECP. Just the heading will have the word ECP. So again, the ECP must submit an application form, a renewal fee, satisfy any conditions, pay the fee, and then will be registered. Right. Part 4 talks about the exam, the PAE. Right. So the PAE says, if you are a graduate, you must have the experience in the regulations. The regulations talked about 3 years of experience. So if you want to sit for the PAE, you want to be registered as a PE, again, you must put in the application in the form, and now it's online, and you must make the payment beforehand. Right, so if you want to sit for the PAE, the processing fee is 100 ringgit, the examination fee is 500. Right. If it's for the next one is the PCE, right? But here we are talking about PAE. So the PAE will consist of an interview. There will be a professional interview conducted by 2 examiners. There will be a written paper on your practical experience and a written paper on your understanding of the code of conduct. Right? And they can have other examination as determined by the board. Now the board has changed the rules to require to put it in the form of outcome based. For the PCE, the Professional Competency Exam, right? So the PCE is a requirement before you can become a PEPC. You have to pass the PCE first. Right? So if you want to sit for the PCE, you have to apply, and again, you apply online and you pay the fees online. So for the PCE, the processing fee is 100 ringgit. The examination fee is 1,000 ringgit. Excuse me, I just need to. Right, the last part of it is part 7. And part 7 essentially is saying the earlier registration of engineers regulations are revoked. Meaning with this new set of regulations, the earlier one is now debatal. So now again, I like to do a quiz before we come to the questions from your side. The first question is, somebody lodged a complaint against a registered person. Right. So the board, when we receive a complaint, remember, the board will look through and the board will see, is there any basis for the complaint? So the board will send a letter to the person being complained of. And the board will ask for an explanation. And now the board didn't receive any reply. So what the board does is the board will send a reminder and ask, we have received a complaint against you. Can you please give your explanation within 14 days? Again, the person did not reply. So now the board sends a final reminder. And the board says, if I don't hear from you within 7 days, I may take disciplinary action against you. Right? Has he committed an offense? Again, you press on your yes, raise hand. Okay, most of you say yes, he has committed an offense. And what offense? It's Regulation 23, because Regulation 23 says we have to conduct ourselves honorably. Now, when the board sends you a letter, asks you to explain, and you don't reply, you are not acting honorably, you are not acting responsibly, you are not acting ethically. So now the registered person, when he received the final reminder, he quickly replied back, sorry, board, I didn't get your earlier letter because I had already changed my address. Is this acceptable? Again, press on the raise hand. Okay, most of you have been paying attention. It's not acceptable. Why? Because section 14 says, if we change our address, we have to tell the registrar within 3 months of the change. Right. Question 2. A client invites a PPC to be the consultant for his project. Right. He gave the PPC a letter. So from the company Syarikat ABC, he says, Syarikat ABC would like to appoint you to be the consultant for the factory. If you accept it, please indicate by signing below. So the PPC is very happy. Nowadays, to get a job is not easy. So accepts the offer. And then, according to the letter, if you accept it, sign below. So he signs below it, I, so-and-so, of AAA Consulting Engineer, accept this appointment. Has he committed an offense? If you think yes, raise your arm, your hand. Okay, not so many people so sure. But yes, it's an offense because Regulation 27 says the scope of the services, the scope of the services must be clearly defined in a written agreement, right? The letter only says, I want you to be my consultant. If you agree, sign below, right? So you have to have an agreement which lists out what is the scope of your work. Question 3, an owner engages a PPC to be his consultant. Right? When the project is 90% completed, the PPC says, I want to stop. I think you're a very difficult boss to do. You are the owner. And every 2 weeks you come and you kacau me, I cannot tahan anymore. So I want to withdraw from the job. Right? So the owner then engage another engineer to complete the work. Right? The new engineer take over the work as the new consultant for the project. Right? The project is completed. Everybody is happy. But 3 months later, some cracks appear. And the bungalow cannot be used. So the owner complained to the board of engineers. I engage an engineer, do my bungalow, if everything is finished, and then 3 months later, before I can even move my furniture in, there are cracks all over the place. So the board go and question the 2 engineers, and the second engineer say, when I took over, the job was already 80% completed. This settlement is due to foundation, and that was done by the first engineer. So I cannot be responsible for somebody else's job. So which engineer is responsible? Number 1 or number 2? Right? If you think PEPC number 1 is responsible, raise your hand. Okay, if you think PEPC number 2 is responsible, raise your hand. Well, I see both times about the same number of people. So the answer is the last engineer on the job is the one responsible. Right? So the engineer who signed off, this project is now completed. He is responsible for everything done in the project. Even the things done when he was not the engineer. Right? So when PEPC number 2 took over the job, he should make sure he is happy with what was done earlier, because by doing it, he has taken over the responsibility for everything in the project. Okay, question 4. A client appoints an engineer for an industrial project. He's not happy with the work of the engineer, so he sacks the engineer. Then he appoints a second engineer to complete the job. Right? The second engineer comes in, very happy he got the job. He start work straight away. And then the first engineer complained to the board on the conduct of the second engineer. Right? Has the second engineer committed an offense? Well, the first engineer thinks so. Right? So yes, because we have a regulation 31, you cannot take over the job of a first engineer unless you have a letter of release. Right? So our second engineer started on the job without asking for a letter of release. Question 5, PPC is engaged to design and supervise the construction of a training institute. During construction itself, cracks have already appeared, and after an investigation, the main building is declared unsafe. So the investigation says the error is actually in the design. It has been under design. So the client complains to the board on the conduct of the PEPC because he's engaged to design and supervise. But the PPC says, actually the design is, I didn't do, it's my engineer who did it. He's also a PEPC. So which engineer do you think is the one liable? Is it the engineer engaged as the consultant, or is it the engineer actually doing the design? Right. So at the end of the day, it is the engineer who signed off, the submitting person. Right. So if the PPC who is engaged to design and supervise at the end of the project, he's the one who submit the design to the local authority, then he is the liable person. If it is his engineer who is a PPC who is signing off, then it is the employee who is liable. Question 6, an engineer is registered as a PEPC. This is the last one. So this is one which many people are a bit confused. So this engineer, he's a PEPC. So he practice under his own, he calls it engineer AAA consulting engineer, right? And he didn't register AAA consulting engineer as a ECP because he thinks the fee is too high. If he has to pay 1,000 ringgit to register every year. So the board then questioned him, why are you practicing and not through a ECP? So he says, I'm doing it in my individual capacity. Right? I'm not doing it under my company. I'm doing it in my name. So, and this is a question which comes up very often during roadshows. Can we practice under our individual name? And so we need to go back to the Act. Section 7 of the Act says a PEPC is allowed to practice. Right? He's allowed to practice. So is he correct when he says I'm practicing and I'm allowed to practice under section 7(1)(a)? But he also have to look at section 8(1). 8(1) says a PEPC who is residing and practicing in Malaysia. Right? So a PPC is allowed to practice. Right? So if he practice, then he is entitled to submit to any authority. So what is then the meaning of the word practice? Right? 7(1) says he can practice. 8(1) also says only if he's practicing in Malaysia. Right? So practicing, if you look at the dictionary, the practice is how you pursue what you do in your profession. Right? So an engineering practice means you carry on business, you are providing professional engineering services. Right? This is called you are doing engineering practice. You are providing a service. So under section 8.1, when you provide this service, you are allowed to submit to an authority. So anyone who is submitting to an authority is actually having it through a practice. And his practice is, in a sense, he is running a business. Right? What is this business? His business is he is providing professional engineering services. And therefore, section 7A says, if you are doing a business, and a business can be owned by you, it's called a sole proprietorship. It can be owned by you and your partners, it's a partnership, or it can be owned by you, by your company, right? So this business, you can practice as an ECP and you can go to court to get your fees only if you register this business with the Board of Engineers as an ECP. Right? So you cannot say I'm practicing in my own capacity, because when you practice, you are doing business. And if your business is providing professional engineering services, only a business which is registered with the board as an ECP is allowed to do it. Right? So he cannot practice in his individual capacity, because when he practices, he is running a business. Right? And under section 7A, the business must be registered as an ECP. Right. Now we come to Q&A. And I said we'll clear the Q&A for this part, and I will continue to do the Q&A that was not answered earlier. But we may be running out of 5 o'clock. I'm okay with that. If you stay on, it's good, but you won't get extra CPD hours for staying on. You only get 3 hours for staying for this whole session. Okay, let's first look at the questions coming from this part. Right, Architect Amy?
Okay, hold on. Let me just read the question. Banyaknya soalan kejap.
Actually, yeah, maybe I could also now look at it, right? Let me see. No, I can't see it. Yeah, it would have to be. Okay, never mind. You got a nice voice. Let's.
Okay, I will read the questions then. All right, the next question from WM Fahmi Fatuddin. Is it compulsory for ECP sole proprietorship and partnership to register with Suruhanjaya Syarikat Malaysia?
Okay, we have to understand something, right? Running a business. There's another act of parliament called the Registration of Businesses. You know, in Malaysia, we got all kind of laws for registering all kind of things. Under this act of registration of businesses, if you run a business, you must register your business with the Registrar of Businesses. But it exempts certain category of people who do business but don't need to register with the Registrar of Businesses. If you open a Pasar Malam stall, you have to register that business with the Registrar of Businesses. But if your business is governed under another act, right? So if you look at it, engineers doing the business of engineering, we are covered under another act of parliament. We are covered under the Registration of Engineers Act. So we are doing a business, but we don't have to register with the Registrar of Businesses. Right? There's also another exemption. If your business is through a company, and the company is already registered with SSM, you don't need to register with the Registrar of Businesses. So essentially what it means is, if your business is registered with the Board of Engineers, you don't need to register with other people. Right. But if your business is through a company, that company must be registered with SSM.
Okay, next question from Sun Kok Yu. Is MNE ECP is allowed to participate in a project bidding of CNS?
No, you can only do your work in the branch of engineering that you are registered in, both individual and ECP.
Okay, the next question from Tan Kai Hong. Can a PEPC join two different companies as director, then sign CCC for both company at the same time?
Yes, last time the board only allows an engineer to be active in one ECP. But subsequently, about 5 years back, the board changed its policy. The board allows you to be in as many ECPs as you like. So you can be registered under two different ECPs, and you can be doing work under two different ECPs.
Okay. To add on further to that question, Dato', so say it's a body corporate, so you can have two body corporates as your ECP.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Next question from Lau Ai Ling. Referring to subsection 7A bracket 3 bracket C bracket 1, banyak. That for board of directors that remaining 1/3 may be any person. Does this mean that the ECP boss can appoint anybody, friend, family members, business associate from any profession to be in the board of directors?
We've got to understand, we are talking about body corporate, right? Body corporate means a company, right? So in a company, we have a board of directors and we have shareholders. And they are two different things. So to be in the board of directors, you must be approved by the AGM. The people who can vote in the AGM are the shareholders. Right? The board of directors, they may or they may not be shareholders, but the one who put you into the board are the shareholders. Right? And we said we have liberalized on 34A. Under 34A, we said anybody can hold the shares. Right? So now, supposing that company, you own all the shares, we allow it. Right? So to appoint people into the board, it must be approved by the shareholders. But our requirement is, if you want to be registered as ECP, the shareholders must appoint at least 2/3 must be PEPC, and 1/3 can be anybody. So the question is, can I bring my family as directors? Yes, subject to 1/3.
Okay, the next question. Okay. Question from Jason. What are the differences between PEPC and PE? What are the professional engineering services that PE can perform?
at the moment, what happened is before 2015, the PE is the one, is the highest level, right? That means a PE can practice, can do business, and the PE can submit and so on. In 2015, the board made an amendment because the board found that Malaysia, we are a trading nation. So we do a lot of trade with the rest of the world. And at that time, the act doesn't allow a foreigner to be registered as a PE. So Malaysia then says, well, in the case of globalization, we shouldn't bar somebody from registering with the board just because he's a foreigner. Right? So the board then found that, okay, what the board did was the board then created the PEPC. Right? So the board gave all the powers of the PE to the PEPC. Right? So the question was, what is the difference between the PEPC and the PE? And essentially, the PE lost all the powers and it was taken by the PEPC. The PE still have some entitlement in that he can submit for a product which is invented by him or sold by his employer. But the answer to the question is the PE lost all the entitlement and it was taken over by the PEPC. Right. That's not so good news. But the slightly good news is the board is in the process of relooking at it, and the board is looking at how much of this entitlement can we also give back to the PE. But the law as it stands now, everything the PE had was given to the PEPC.
All right, Datuk, the next question from Engineer Ki Ching Guan. If ECP charge lower than the scale of fees for their projects, does the ECP commit an offence?
It is an offence. The scale of fees is required. It's the minimum fee. That means you cannot charge less than that. So if you charge your fees less than what is in the scale of fees, you have committed an offence. And the offence is committed normally by the ECP, right? Because jobs are given to ECP. But although it's committed by the ECP, it is the people who commit the offence. So the director and in the board of directors, one of the director is responsible for the day-to-day operation of the ECP. So he will be charged. Right.
Okay, the next question.
It's mandatory. I'm sorry, but it is mandatory.
Okay, Dato', on top of that, are there any actions taken by the disciplinary committee for those ECP who violated this Act 138 in terms of the scale of fee?
Right. We take action if there is evidence. So far, we have not had somebody coming to us showing us evidence that this company has charged below the scale of fees. Yeah, I know. In road shows, everybody complain. They say, we know nobody is following. why is the board not taking action? So I say, if you know and you got the evidence, give it to the board. Because it's a very straightforward thing. We have a scale of fees. If your agreement doesn't show the same amount as in the scale of fees, it's very clear you have committed an offense. But so far, nobody has given us this kind of evidence.
Okay, all right. Okay, the next question from Lee Hing Yu, in reference to Act 138, if the air pollution control system, such as dust collector or spray booth, was designed and sold by a PE, can he help customer to endorse and submit drawings or plan to the local authority for approval, or still need to get a PEPC to endorse the design drawing?
The PE under 8.2 is allowed to submit for a product invented by him. So if he was the one who did all of it, he is allowed to be the submitting person.
Okay, the next question. Sorry, dia dah ternaik atas. Sekejap ya. Okay, can PEPC submit plan to local authority without setting up an ECP?
No.
Okay.
No, you can only practice through an ECP, except for 8.2 when it's a product designed by you. But like I said, the board is coming out with this amendment. We want to allow for some type of work for the PE to be able to submit.
Okay, all right. The next question from Engineer Ki Ching Guan. Is it mandatory? Is it a mandatory requirement to have an IOW to supervise civil and structural work?
No, because you can do it yourself if you are willing to run all over the place. You can also ask your engineer to do that job if you are prepared to pay more. But the IOW probably is a cheaper option for you. So it's not mandatory because, it's to assist the engineer. And if the engineer is kedekut, dia tak nak bayar for IOW, then it means he is responsible for everything that goes on site. If there's IOW, then the IOW will certify I've done the supervision. The pulse was actually driven to this length. Like there are certain part of the work where you need to have somebody on the site all the time, like piling work, things that will be covered up later. Even the reinforcement. For example, you have reinforcement. Once you pour the concrete, you cannot see it anymore. Right? So for those kind of things, you have a choice. You yourself can go and stand there and watch. Or you can call your engineer to do that. Or we allow you to get an IOW to do that part.
All right. The next question from Teo Peng Kiat. Can a graduate engineer perform the role of IOW? Should the graduate engineer registered as IOW in order to take up employment as an IOW?
Right, it's a tricky question. To do the job of an IOW, the graduate engineer can do. He doesn't need to register as an IOW. Right? If the graduate engineer wants to work as an IOW, then of course he has to register as an IOW. Right? Because sometimes this is what actually happened. Sometimes the company or the client says, okay, I will allow you to have an IOW for this job. Right? So a graduate engineer can do the work, but because the client will only pay for an IOW, and you are now going to sign off, so you can do it. A graduate engineer can do the job of an IOW. He doesn't need to register as an IOW. But if he wants to register as an IOW, that's a different thing. He qualifies to be. Last time there was some confusion because people were thinking the job requires 3 IOWs. So if the graduate engineer is doing the job, he should be registered as an IOW. But no, the principle is the IOW, no, it's like you need certain qualification to be an IOW. Like it's like to be an engineer, you need a degree. Right? So if you have a master's or a PhD, then of course you get more points. But the legal requirement is you must have a degree. That's all. So the requirement, the work of a IOW, the engineer can do. The graduate engineer can do. The PEPC can do. And he can do it without having to register as a IOW.
All right, so we go to the next question from Aaron. For some design and build project, must an ECP be employed to carry out the design and supervision? Can only the necessary PEPC be employed to provide design review, supervision, and endorsement? How does this change with conventional building projects and more complex projects such as power plants, solar plants, etc.?
All projects must be done by an ECP. Right? We have got to understand the principle. The act is there so that only qualified people can do those things. Right? And I think I made it clear, if you want to be a consultant, you have to do it through an ECP. You can be the sole proprietor, but you are not doing it in your own capacity. You're doing it through your own business. So all designs for any kind of work must be done by a ECP. The engineering work must be designed by ECP. But the people involved can also act as a contractor if it is a design and build project. Right? But it has to be done by an ECP.
Okay, let's go to the next question. Okay, this question is long from Yu Chun Tae. Good evening, Datuk Paduka. How can we verify an engineer's contact information to confirm if they truly endorse a particular document or drawing? As a PEPC, an engineer should only undertake assignments for which they are qualified or have experience in the specific technical field. However, there are a few engineers who work in areas where they lack the necessary experience, leading to poor quality assignments. Often, authorities do not truly check the drawings and reports produced, assuming that professionals know what they are doing. Can the board do something about this? Can the board conduct random checks on drawings and reports submitted by PEPC to ensure the quality of engineering in our country?
We have to understand that as a PEPC, you are deemed to be competent to do the work. Right? So you can be a PPC, say, in civil engineering. And civil engineering is a very broad field. It can involve the design of a high-rise building. It can involve a flood project, a dam, a long bridge. So legally, once you are registered, you have the legal right to do the design. Right? But at the same time, we practice a self-regulatory process. We say you are bound by the code of conduct, and essentially, as a professional, you should only do what you are comfortable with. Right? So if you breach that, then you might be opening yourself up to disciplinary action later. Right? So in the example that was given, what I understand from it is that there are people who will do things that they have no experience or no expertise. And one common problem that comes out in the disciplinary cases is you are a civil engineer, but you haven't done any sewerage works, right? Because in sewerage works, there are a number of PDC forms, different stages, and so on. And so when somebody with no experience start to do that kind of job, then we get a lot of problems. But legally, he has done, he is legally allowed to do it. Conduct-wise, ethically, if he does it and then it causes problems, and what we can take action in a sense, if his actions cause problems to public safety. Right, you remember Regulation 24 says the paramount thing, the most important thing is public safety. Now, if he does it and it's a poor job, and we had a case where the client complains to the board, he complains that this engineer is doing a terrible job. But he's complaining on the competency of the engineer to do the job. Right? So the board's response to the complainant, the client, is if this person has done a job that is no good, you have every right to terminate him. One, you can sue him for the problems that he caused. The board can only take action against him if what he has done gives rise to public safety. Right? So it's like you got your driving license. So the law says you can drive. But we also know that people, they got their license because they took the test in a very small car. And now he's got a license, and he buys one of these big vehicle like Alphard. I always admire the people who can drive this van kind of thing, right? And then as he's driving, he knocks against something at the side and so on. So the law allows him that he's allowed to drive. But if as a driver he does a poor job, then the boss can sack him, the boss can sue him for the damages to whatever. So the boss or the client can sack him, can get another engineer to come in to repair all the work and charge the cost to the first engineer. Right? So it becomes a contractual issue rather than conduct. Because we allow to, and if he does it so badly, then there is a case that he has done something, he has no idea about how to do it. And it's actually very difficult to have evidence on that. Like I said, I have a recent case where a local authority complained on the engineer who submitted to the local authority. Right, it says he submitted and tak ikut the rules and all that. So the boss response is, if he didn't follow the rule, you throw out the submission. And we think in a case like that, it is not a conduct issue, it is a contractual issue. Except where, like I said, where public safety is concerned, or it is so clear that he has gone beyond his capacity to do it.
All right. The next question from Nadia Ashikin. If PEPC is no longer employed for engineering service, probably move to management or become a trainer, whatever else, can we apply exemption for the 50 CPD hours?
No. But we do give lesser hours for PE.
Okay, all right.
Because although you have moved, you can at any time want to go back to do the work of a PEPC. I mean, like I worked in a design branch. I was doing hands-on design. And then as we get promoted, we do less and less technical, more and more on admin. But as a PPC, I can at any time want to go back and do design. So if I don't keep up to date with CPD, I lose that right.
Okay, all right. The next question from Lim Siu Hai. As mentioned by Dato', the board will commence the investigation in accordance with Regulation 22 upon receipt of the complaint. However, will the board commence an investigation based solely on an anonymous surat layang that refers to the board without naming the complainant? If the board does so, how will the board ensure that the surat layang does not contain allegations of fraud and misleading information?
No, if it is anonymous, there's no way we will investigate. Right? Because if it's anonymous, and we will get thousands of complaints. Right? We do know that sometimes it's difficult for people to give a complaint. And so the board practices a whistleblower policy. If you make a complaint and you know, say you complain against your boss, and you know if the boss finds out, you're in trouble. So you can make your complaint and say this is under whistleblower. And under whistleblower, we will keep your name confidential. In fact, our rules are, if it's a whistleblower, only the executive director will handle it. The other staff are not allowed to see who made the complaint.
Okay, the next question from Jacqueline. What is the function of the stakeholder sum? Who is getting the most benefit from this process by appointing the board as the stakeholder?
The purpose of the stakeholder is this. We have two parties, the client and the engineer. So the engineer says, I finished the work up to 50%. You only pay me up to 30%. Right? So the client is thinking, you exaggerate. You say you finish up to 50%. But actually, my estimation is you only finish up to 30%. Right? So two parties quarrel. And then we cannot have another engineer until this is resolved. So what the board does is, the board say, okay, between the two parties, there is a difference of 20% in the fees. The engineer claims he has done it. The client says no. So the client comes to the board, and the board will tell the client, this amount which is different, you give it over to the board. The board will hold it as a stakeholder. Right? And then the board will ask the engineer and the client to go for arbitration. The board can even help in appointing somebody to look through it. And that person, having looked at both, will say finally, in his assessment, the amount of work done by the engineer is, it can be 50%, it can be less. Then the board will pay out from the stakeholders fund the amount due to the engineer, and the board would return the balance back to the client. Right? So the purpose of the board is because the engineer is worried, once I give the letter of release, I may never see my money. Right? So the board is saying, don't worry, we will ask the client to deposit the money with the board. So if now the arbitration says you have done it all, we give you all the money. That's how the stakeholder system works.
Okay, the next question. Sorry. Can a registered engineer review another registered engineer without consent? Question from Isaac.
Review meaning review a job. I am not sure what the question is.
Okay.
You are employed. You do the design. Right? Can another person come in and look at your design? I guess that's more or less the question. I think so. Supposing that's the question, then the answer would be the problem actually arises in a different way. Sometimes the client, and there's a term for it, we call it value engineering. Sometimes the client thinks there's a cheaper way of doing the job. Right? Because I employ a consultant, the consultant say, okay, this is my design. And I look at it and I say, I think it's possible to do it in a cheaper way. Right? So many times the client, sometimes under the influence of the other engineer, although they don't say directly, the client has a right to call another engineer to look at the job, not to look at the design, but to look at that job and to come up with a cheaper or a more effective project. That's why we use the term value engineering. You use your engineering skill to come out with a more, usually it's a cheaper way of doing things. Right? And sometimes the engineers suspect this guy is actually trying to intervene. So we always look very closely at the whole process. Right? You cannot go to a client and say, I can do a better job. that's intervening. That's contravening 31B. Right? But the client has a right, I'm building my bungalow. And then this fellow is saying, my columns are so huge, I never see before. Maybe 20-story building is okay. I have a right as a client to call another engineer to do a review in terms of value engineering. So it's a very fine line, and it depends also on what actually finally happens. And normally, we will generally not allow the reviewer to take over the job. Right? You can come in, you can review, you can say, here's a better way of doing it. But if you continue and you become the new engineer, then we will scrutinize very carefully the whole process. If you do value engineering and you don't get involved further than that, then normally the board won't intervene. And also we have a circular which looks at reviewing, looks at checking, and looks at the difference between the two.
Okay, the next question from Tai Kim Singh. In what condition allows alternative design engineer, and why AD is not considered as supplanting?
No, again, when we talk alternative design, you employ a consultant and the consultant will give you his design. You can ask the consultant, give me more alternatives. Right? When somebody else come in with an alternative, that's a different thing totally. Right? So we have to understand, I employ you as my consultant and you come up with a design, right? I can ask you to do an alternative design. If you don't want to do it, and a very common example is say a bridge. A bridge can be designed in many different ways. If you come in and you do the conventional way, maybe I like to look at the cable stay bridge like the Penang Bridge, or I might want to look at a cable bridge like the San Francisco Bridge. So you can ask your client, your engineer, to come up with alternative designs. In fact, a good engineer should never come up with only one design. Right at the start, if I get somebody to come and want to do a bridge for me, I would want him to, at the early stage, come up with alternative concepts. Then I pick the one that I want. So here it's, I guess this is more like somebody is coming in to give an alternative design. And we don't allow that, but we cannot stop the client from asking another engineer to do value engineering. And I covered that earlier.
All right, next question from Jacqueline. Can a suspended PEPC, in this case, this suspended PEPC is a managing director, continues to manage day-to-day office but not handle any engineering works?
Yeah, many consultants, the CEO need not be an engineer. Right? All we have is the director who is responsible for the day-to-day engineering decisions must be a PEPC. Right? So I know in many consulting firms, the office manager is usually not an engineer because you have to pay the engineer a lot and the engineer may not be a good office manager. But he cannot do engineering, which I think the question it's also stated, isn't it? He's just doing administration. You remember we said in the board of directors, 2/3 must be PEPCs. If one of the PEPC has now been suspended, then they have to replace him with another PEPC, but he can still sit on the board as a person.
Okay, the next question from Ahmad Nazmi. Is it illegal practice to do freelance engineering works? Ni banyak kat luar ni.
Freelance.
Freelance engineering work, is it illegal?
Well, at
Question
the end
from
of the
Nazmi.
day, why do people employ an engineer? Because under our UBBL, when you want to do anything, you must have a PSP, a principal submitting person. You must have a submitting person. At the end of the day, the submitting person is responsible for signing the relevant Borang G. But to come to that stage, he needs people to do the drafting. He needs people to do the calculations. And I know that sometimes they do get freelancers to come and do those things. But at the end of the day, our process is when we finish, the building must have a CCC. Otherwise, no one can use it. To get the CCC, someone must sign Form F. And usually it's the architect, except for factories and so on. And there are 21 Borang G to be signed. The one who signed it is the one who take all responsibility that it's been done properly. Right? So how you do it in the process, whether you, because some firms don't have enough work to have full-time, for example, a full-time engineer. So I do know that, I mean, I've heard that there are firms who would pull in somebody part-time to do some work. But at the end of the day, we control the whole process by the submitting person.
Okay. Okay, Dato', on top of
But
that,
it might contravene the guy who freelance. If he has a permanent job, and then on his free time he do freelance, it might be against his employment, right? So he may not be giving full fidelity to his employer. But there's a different issue.
okay. Okay, Dato', on top of that, I would like to further ask this question. I would like to expand it further. I've encountered many engineers when we are looking for ECP or PEPC. They are willing to be the submitting person, SP, to sign, to provide services. We requested them to provide engineering services, but then they said we can just sell our signature, but we ask somebody else to do it, meaning that this PEPC is selling their signature. I have the conversations, quite a number of them on WhatsApp and so on. If I submit this WhatsApp conversation to BM, will BM take any action on it for PEPC selling signature?
If they do it, because you're talking, and he may be thinking, this one was a joke, but if he actually takes it over and is just selling it, yes. But based on WhatsApp alone, WhatsApp is only intent. Dia belum buat lagi.
Okay.
Right. So, and he'll be stupid. I had one case where the first engineer did the work, almost finished, and then the client didn't pay him, so he discharged himself. And then he brought in another engineer, the type you're talking about, who sells the signature. So this second engineer came in, his job was to sign off. He charged 4,500 for it. Right? Because he says, somebody dah buat kerja, I'm just signing. And then what happened, it was a row of shop houses. And then the shop houses settled. And now the client is suing him for 1 million ringgit. At the same time, the client reported him to the board, and now the board is taking action against him. Right? So people who sell their signatures, they should think very, very hard. And because he signs, and like I said, we practice last man standing. I gave it the example. The guy who signs at the end takes all responsibility and liability. So if he thinks that responsibility is only worth that little bit, and then I say good luck to him.
Okay.
And he's sharing that, right? Because he says, I'm getting somebody to do the work. So whatever you pay, he must pay some of it to this other guy.
Correct.
But on the basis of a communication, it may not be enough for us to take action.
Okay. All right. We have a few more questions. Next question from Muhammad Raihan. Okay, the question is, let's imagine that if I work with ABC company doing consultancy services, however, my company does not registered with BMS, does not registered with ECP. Okay, but I was engaged to endorse the documents by sole proprietorship. The reason why not registered with body corporate because our director is a foreigner. I think it is difficult because the requirement 2/3 of the director must be PEPC. My company is an MNC and the directors are mostly foreigners. Just asking for opinion.
Again, it's okay. If he has evidence that this is going on, he can actually put it as a whistleblower. But for he himself, he's being asked to do things, and at the end of the day, if I understood the question, the company is saying, can you sign off on all of this? Right? So he is then on record, he is the submitting person. Right? And he is in effect, he's almost like the guy who is signing and selling a signature. Right? Maybe he feels a bit safer because this Mat Salleh must have done a good job. But he's got to remember, we think Mat Sallehs are better, doing a better job, but it's not always true. I had, when I was in service, we had a project which was done by a very renowned British consulting firm. And we had a lot of problem with the person they sent to the site. And so much so, we almost were going to take action against the firm. Then the firm sent somebody else. And the whole thing is, the firm has got a good reputation. But this job was in Sarawak. So they don't send their best people there. But the moment trouble came up, they then sent one of their best people and he cleaned it up very fast. Right, so the Mat Sallehs who come to Malaysia are not necessarily the best from the company. So he has to register an ECP, right? Because he cannot sign off on his own capacity. So next, he is in effect like the guy selling a signature. In a way, because he's actually working for that company, isn't it? So okay, he can then no, it's not wrong if he goes through the design, he's happy with it, and then he signs on it.
Okay, all right, Datuk. So we have our last question from Mel D. Can a foreigner or expatriate become a PEPC?
Yeah. I said before 2015, we had a category called temporary engineers. And this is because our act allows us, we can only register citizens as professional engineers. And then we took that away because for globalization, in Malaysia, we are a trading nation. And also, we shouldn't bar people because they are not citizens. Right? And to do that, we introduce another level, the PEPC. So the PEPC, we are not stopping foreigners, but we are saying if you want to practice, you must understand our laws. So the PEPC is testing the person not so much on technical competency, but on his understanding of the local laws and local practice. Right. So as far as the board is concerned, anybody can register with the board. So a foreigner can pass all this, we will register him, and he has the same entitlement as anyone else. You know, in Taiwan, they also do the same thing. You have to pass the local laws, and their local laws are in Chinese. At least ours, we do have English translation. So now we have no restriction on who we can register. Citizenship is not a criteria at all.
Okay, all right, Datuk. That was the last question of the day. Thank you for the extra time.
Yeah, but tell them they don't get the extra CPD.
All right. So I would like to thank Datuk Paduka Engineer Kizrul Abdullah for his sharing session on Act 138 together with Registration of Engineers Regulation 1990. So to all participants, please fill up the sign-up form for you to claim your CPD. Either you can click on the link in the